Hey, how's it going, everybody? Shaun here for another daily movie review. And today we're going to do a kind of a follow up to what we did the other day. The other day I talked about Police Story and talked a little bit about Police Story 2. But so I was kind of just going through the Police Story movies. So I figured I'll make a video about the other two of the original four. Is that a quadrilogy? The quadrilogy of Police Story movies before they rebooted it. Today we're going to talk about Super Cop, which I still have my old Dragon Dynasty DVD, my old double disc here. Look at that. How to buy this thing at Walmart. It's a weird thing. Walmart always had, and to this day sometimes, always has like these weird, like international movies come out that you won't be able to find them anywhere else. Like, I live in kind of a small town, so options are a little bit limited. So, but you couldn't go to Target and find Super Cop the day of release. Even once in a while, I remember the Draft House, Alamo Draft House, their label. Those movies will be at Walmart, but they won't be anywhere else. It's very weird. I bought the whole Vengeance trilogy at Walmart. I'm talking Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance, Old Boy, and Sympathy for Lady Vengeance. I bought all those at Walmart. I bought some Evangelion anime movies at Walmart. I bought Ghost in the Shell at Walmart, the anime. Store of the people, I guess. Store for the cinephile. But anyways, yeah, let's talk about Super Cop and also its follow-up film, First Strike. Now, these are not directed by Jackie Chan. The directorial duties were taken over by Stanley Tong, who is kind of has a stunt guy background. I think he might have actually been one of the dudes, maybe that was part of Chan's crew. I could be wrong about that. I'm not 100% sure, but he becomes a director. He directs Super Cop. He directs Rumble in the Bronx. He directs First Strike, and then he directs Mr. Magoo for Disney. Remember that Leslie Nielsen? They made a live-action version of Mr. Magoo. He directed that. So that's just a little interesting tidbit there. But so from here on out, the series is different. I think I kind of intimated this or said this on the last video, but they basically become different movies. They basically become like James Bond movies. They're no longer kind of these small scale grounded things. They become like really big international films in a much broader sense. They have like a broader appeal because even though I think you could look at the older Police Story movies 1 and 2 and say like they have a broad appeal because of their structure and because of the fight choreography and stuff. It's something that everybody around the world can enjoy. Super Cop seemed way more kind of attuned to a Western eye, specifically to Western audiences. And same thing with First Strike, especially First Strike. First Strike literally is structured like a James Bond movie, like a bad James Bond movie. It even has scenes that feel almost directly lifted from James Bond movies, like on Her Majesty's Secret Service. There's a whole thing where they're skiing down a mountain. That's also in First Strike. But starting with Super Cop was the first Police Story movie I'd ever seen. I did not know that it was part of a larger series. I, saw the dub. It came out originally in 1992, then it was put out in the U.S. in 1996 during kind of the Jackie Chan craze. I mean, this was like Rumble in the Bronx came out in 1995. 96, there's Super Cop. They re-released Super Cop, and then they put First Strike comes out like shortly after that. So there was kind of a thing before he starts making American movies, because then there's like Rush Hour and the Tuxedo and all that stuff. Operation Condor, I think, was brought to America around the same time. Or Armor of the Gods. But this Armor of the Gods 2, actually. So it's kind of weird. And just as a side tangent, that's why Jackie Chan, I think, looked ageless and timeless for so long, is because his movies would come out years after they had come out in America or in China and in Japan. So when they would finally get released in America, you just like never realized if you were watching a new movie or an old movie. I'm talking about like a 10-year-old kid. Like I didn't understand that. So he always just seemed like kind of timeless, like ageless almost in a weird way. But 1996 rolls around, Super Cop comes out. It was kind of a staple in my house. I used to rent it from the corner store down the road from where I live, the block or two, like all the time. Every other weekend, renting Super Cop. And I loved it. I loved everything about it. I loved its humor. I loved the stunts. I loved even the story itself. I think it's kind of a pretty generally okay story. Michelle Yeoh developed a huge crush on Michelle Yeoh. This also would have been around the time Michelle Yeoh kind of gets a a Western push. You know, she became a Bond girl around this time. I think a year later. Was it 1997? Tomorrow Never Dies comes out. And I had known Michelle Yeoh from watching late night on cable. My parents were cheap, so we had the Stars package. But Stars came with Encore. And then people used to, you just kind of like ignore Encore. But I watched a lot of like older movies because of Encore. I used to watch a lot of Westerns. I've watched like a lot of Bonanza in my life. A lot of Combat. But she had these Chinese like kind of fantasy martial arts movies that are kind of more akin to something like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, even though not like Prestige though, like the cheap genre version called Heroic Trio. And then she was also in a sequel version called Heroic Trio 2. Maggie Cheung, not Supercop, but Police Story staple Maggie Cheung, who plays Jackie's girlfriend. She's also in the Heroic Trio movies. So I was just super into it, just super primed for it. And the thing about Supercop that I think, like, especially after watching Police Story and Police Story 2, is that it is Jackie Chan kind of having to a little bit admit that he's his age. The fight scenes are not as kinetic. They're not as physically impressive. Now it feels more like stunt work. Now he does like big stunts where he's like hanging off of a helicopter, or sliding down a dangerous cliff. The fight stuff isn't actually all that impressive relative to have just watching Police Story and Police Story 2. Because he would have been, I think, in his mid 40s by the time Supercop is made, or maybe approaching 40. I don't even know how old he is. How old is Jackie Chan? He's an older guy. He was an older guy by this point. He was not some spring chicken. I'm sure he had been put himself through it. I'm sure his body felt it. But so there seems to be more of a focus on kind of these big stunts, big explosions. That seems to be more of the focal point. Whereas you watch older Jackie Chan movies, not just the Police Story movies, but older Jackie Chan stuff, even like something like Operation Condor or Armor of the Gods, sorry. Those are like, he's way more like physically nimble. And all of those set pieces are predicated on that. Like we talked about Police Story. The pace and the tone of scenes are not created in editing and post. It is through the physical action of the performers. And I noticed in Supercop, well, it definitely has some of it there. It is not as pronounced. Definitely wasn't as pronounced. It seems, like I said, to be more in line with kind of Western action movies, Western action plots, James Bond. Mission Impossible had not come out at this time, but just felt more Western. I don't know if there's a better way to put it. It is, which is fine. Like, it's still actually a very good movie. I really enjoyed Supercop. It definitely leans heavier into the kind of overtly comic stuff. But what I found interesting was, I know this is all over the place. I'm sorry. I have COVID. Cut me some slack. But the thing that was the most interesting, I thought, was that like some of the the physical stuff, like the acrobatic stuff, the fighting stuff, is actually in scenes that aren't like fight scenes. They're like exhibitionist moments. Like one of the big fight scenes in the movie is when he's fighting a guy that's like, one of these soldiers, and they're in training, and they decide to do an exhibition show, and they fight, and but there's no real like danger in terms of his character or anything like that. And then it doesn't really happen very much in the movie. It's all pretty low key relative to what came before this. I'm very curious to why that was. Like I said, maybe it was just his age. Maybe it's an acknowledgement of that. But it definitely does kind of show you what is to come later in his career when he starts doing Western American movies. I think the last time he probably went for broke was another Stanley Tong film, Rumble in the Bronx. That one actually has a lot more like physicality in it. And I think the reason for that is that was his second shot at being like an American star, because that was put out in the United States, I think day and date or around the same time that it actually came out everywhere else. It was like an American production. It's a very weird movie, Rumble in the Bronx. I would love to talk about Rumble in the Bronx just on its own someday. Because it's like a Chinese perspective on like American cities and crime. And it's kind of an interesting like cultural piece, honestly. But Supercop, I still like Supercop. It's still fun. Still had a great time. Now we get to First Strike. So I watched the U.S. release, which is about 22 minutes shorter than the Chinese, the Hong Kong cut. I was going to watch the Hong Kong cut at some point. I did actually get a hold of a version of the full version, but I figured, I was like, oh well, I'll watch the like American one and like maybe I could compare and contrast or whatever. But after watching it, and I used to really like First Strike when I was growing up. After watching it, it is really tedious. It's not a great movie. It goes way too much into the James Bond territory, so much so that it just does not feel. I don't know. There's something, I guess, maybe just about like just watching like Asian cinema. It just doesn't feel that way. It just feels like a bad James Bond movie, and it's boring. The characters aren't interesting. The plot is overly convoluted in a way that, I mean, a lot of the plots in these are kind of silly, especially like Super Cop's got kind of a silly plot, but it's like not so ridiculous, and it is a little smaller scale. So once they bring it to this like big international level where there's, the Chinese, the Russians, the Americans, like it just loses something and it just becomes not that interesting. I was zoning out. And even the fight stuff, like there's this big fight between Jackie and like these 6 or 7 dudes. It's the scene that showcases the ladder fight, I used to call it as a kid. Just not that impressive relative to what had come before. Which I know, look at me, schlubby American dude saying like, hey Jackie, looking like you're kind of slowing down at almost 50. But it just as an audience member though, you can't help but kind of notice that he is slower. The choreography is less complicated and just more kind of almost like they're kind of just like, we know what we're doing. We're kind of resting on our laurels a little bit. I did not love Super Cop. Or not Super Cop, sorry, First Strike. Honestly, I don't know. I would skip it. Next time I do like a Jackie Chan festival at my house, I'll probably skip over First Strike. Kind of a downer to end the series on this. The, police story proper on this one. But that's what happened. I'm kind of like just struggling to find interesting things to say about these movies. I mean, Super Cop, I think most people have seen and most people like. It's still got, a lot of fun action. It's paced very well. It's kind of a quick in and out movie. It does have, like I said, it's more stunt based in terms of just like set piece stunts, like Michelle Yeoh riding the dirt bike up on the train and the fight on the train, and kind of Jackie Chan having to balance himself without falling off the train and whatnot. And then riding on the helicopter when he grabs the ladder, the hanging ladder and stuff, and flying over Hong Kong. Like those are cool moments. Those are like things that you saw Tom Cruise do for a long time. Now, Tom Cruise, to his credit, has stepped up his game. I mean, Mission Impossible Fallout is, I don't know how most people feel about it. I think it's one of the best, like, action movies as an action film of, like, a generation. Like, that movie is bonkers impressive. In the same kind of way that I would feel impressed with something like a Jackie Chan movie. And also it has that meta quality of, like, knowing that they actually beat the shit out of each other and really got hurt a bunch of times. So it adds stakes to every scene. It's smart when you let people know when you're going to go take all these risks and you're going to do all this stuff. Show us some bloopers. It just helps us invest. It makes you seem even cooler. Be like, whoa, look at that crazy motherfucker. He broke his foot doing that. Fucking wild shit, man. Kind of like in Rumble in the Bronx when Jackie is jumping off that car garage onto a balcony. He broke his foot. Had to be in a cast for the rest of filming. This man is impressive. This man is a machine. He truly is a super cop. All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to know more about Zoobox, a bunch of links in the description for our Facebook, Instagram, my personal Twitter. Also, if you would like to make a request for one of these daily videos or maybe even something for the big show, Zoobox Goes to the Movies, leave it in the comments and we'll put it on the list. All right, everybody. You have a good one.